In hindsight, trading Brian Robinson this offseason would have been a pretty big mistake, and the replacement talk might be getting a little overblown at this point. That right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. I am David Harrison, beat reporter for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and WUSA9.com, bringing you insight and analysis every day right here with you on the show 5 days a week. Appreciate all the everydayers out there who keep coming back and sticking with the show even during the off season. Whether you're in the DMV or you're repping the burgundy and gold anywhere else, I'm glad that you're here right now. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this episode. If you're tuning in for the first time, I want to thank you for checking out the show. Locked On Commanders is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So hopefully you like what you hear and you come back again. Coming up on today's episode, we're going to start by taking a look at Brian Robinson Jr.'s potential to hit a 1,000-yard rushing season, what that means for the Commanders' ground game overall. Then we're going to dig into who Brian Robinson really is as a running back, why he fits Cliff Kingsbury's offense, and how the team can get even more out of him in this second go-round. Finally, we'll tackle the big question: has the offseason trade talk about Brian Robinson been warranted, or has it gone a little bit too far? Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So let's get right into it. Starting right off at the top, is the speculation about Brian Robinson disrespectful? Not entirely. I'm going to put it right there. Not entirely. It's natural to question a lack of production. Whenever there's a lack of production on a team, the players that are kind of central to that production area are going to be questioned. It's just kind of a natural part of things. So the running game struggles outside the quarterback, the running backs, the offensive line, they're going to get questioned. If the run defense struggles, the front seven, you're going to get questioned. It's kind of how those things come in. However, you have to, I don't say you have to, right? Because you don't really have to do anything, but writing off a player like Brian Robinson Jr. without fully understanding how he plays, why he produces, and the best way for him to get production as part of this team, I think is important, because if you go to the lengths of saying he should be traded or he's not going to be any good or those types of things, that's where I think the disrespect starts to creep in a little bit. There's a difference between wanting to see production improve and just wanting to cast a guy away as kind of the scapegoat for that production not being up to snuff, at least to your or my standards the year prior. So I think most see a need for offensive line improvement, right? For the run game to get better as well. I think most of us agree with that. So nobody's necessarily putting it all on Brian Robinson, even if it appears that way in some of the takes out there. Even if you think simply replacing Brian Robinson is the answer, like that's all you needed to do this offseason, is the trade replacement talk justified, disrespectful? Probably not surprising to everydayers. I think it falls between the two, right? What isn't disrespectful? Well, the fact that there's no sacred cows on this team, right? Again, Dan Quinn, Lance Newmark, Adam Peters, we've heard from them all. There's no sacred cows. Nobody is untouchable on this team. When the running game ranks 16th when you don't include quarterback stats and third when you do, that's a pretty big disparity there. Clearly, there's going to be an interest in how the team gets better on the ground outside of relying on Jaden Daniels, because it isn't a situation here where Jaden is just gobbling up all the yards and there's just nothing left for the running backs. Lamar Jackson, Baltimore Ravens quarterback, MVP candidate, led all quarterbacks in rushing yards last year, had even more than Jaden Daniels. The Ravens still finished fourth in the NFL in non-quarterback rushing. Jalen Hurts, Philadelphia Eagles, was third in quarterback rushing. And we know what Saquon did, right? And he wasn't alone. Kyler Murray was the fourth leading rusher among quarterbacks in the NFL. The Arizona Cardinals were still top 10 in non-quarterback rushing. Josh Allen, the MVP, the fifth most running yards by a quarterback. They were 13th in non-quarterback rushing. And believe me, Locked On Bills is having plenty of conversations about the future of the running back room, only they like their main running back. The question is, where does he get help from, right? And Jaden didn't lead the NFL in rushing attempts by a quarterback. That actually went to Jalen Hurts, who had a running back running so well that he was in the MVP conversation. And in my opinion, had he been allowed to break the record, probably would have been the MVP, but that doesn't matter. So let's take stock of who Brian Robinson is first and foremost, at least from a football standpoint. This is all football, not personal, not personality, all football, right? Drafted in the third round of the 2022 NFL draft, Robinson was expected to come in and be kind of the power back rotational player behind Antonio Gibson. Didn't take long, however, for everyone attending that year's training camp to see and realize that Brian Robinson Jr. was the better back overall. By the end of camp and at the end of preseason, he was the number one guy. I remember vividly going on a national fantasy football radio show and being asked about Brian Robinson and legitimately surprising them when I told them he's going to be the number one back for this team. Fortunately for me, he proved me right because I was a little premature at the point then. Then he gets shot in the leg and the hip during a robbery attempt in D.C. And just like that, he went from a starting NFL back to injured and not making his NFL debut until week 5 in a 21-17 loss to the Tennessee Titans. He didn't start, but he did play. He got 9 carries, 22 yards. But again, he played. It was a win because he played. Of course, B-Rob's career hasn't been without setbacks even beyond that. Beyond the unfortunate shooting that delayed his debut, he's also dealt with some injuries that have limited his availability at times. And we all know the most important ability is availability. It's an important factor for Commanders to consider. It's an important factor for us to consider. But let's not, confuse it to say that he's been just the most often injured running back in the NFL because it hasn't been that dramatic either. But it is clear that the team believed in his ability to be their lead back when he's healthy. He did end up starting week 6 of his rookie season, averaged 3.5 yards per carry, started again in week 7. The average went up again. He got his first 100-yard game in week 11 against Houston, 23-10 win over the Texans, 105 yards on 18 carries for Brian Robinson Jr., finished with 85 or more rushing yards in 4 of the final 5 games he played that rookie year because he was one of the ones that sat out week 18 against the Dallas Cowboys, the game where Sam Howell flashed some potential and ended up eventually getting the starting job the next season. His second season came under pass-happy Eric Bieniemy. Nobody stood in the way of EB and throwing 50 times per game whenever he chose to do so. Robinson, still the RB1, got 11 or more carries in just 6 games that season. That's your primary running back. The team was 3-3 in those matchups. They were 1-8 in every other matchup where Brian Robinson had 10 or fewer carries. I'm not saying it's a direct correlation, but it's a correlation. In 2024, Brian Robinson carried the ball at least 11 times, 10 times. The team lost just twice. That's really where this conversation needs to be had because the key to a successful ground attack with Brian Robinson as the lead back isn't about B-Rob individually. It's about the strategy of how you get the most out of the player. So we've established that the running game with Brian Robinson Jr. has potential, but it's not just about wanting more yards or a bigger workload. To really understand the trade talk and whether it's fair or not, we need to take a closer look at who Brian Robinson is a player, what makes him tick, how does he fit in the offense, and we're going to break all that down next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that today thanks to our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are heating up, and every night brings you can't-miss moments, game-winning shots, breakout performances, and momentum swings that keep us on the edge of our seats. It's a perfect time to get in on the action, especially if you love tracking player trends and stats. Take the Indiana Pacers, for example, currently minus 220 favorites to win the East, or the Oklahoma City Thunder, dominating the West at minus 1,000 odds. Knowing which players are stepping up in these big moments can give you an edge when building your bets. That's where FanDuel comes in. You got player props, live betting, same game parlays. You can combine live prop bets as the game unfolds, adjusting your strategy based on what you're seeing. And if you got a read on a player heating up, back it up with a same game parlay in game that can really boost the excitement. Speaking of big moments, just like we analyze key plays here on Locked On Commanders, FanDuel helps you turn those insights into smarter bets. New to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's take a look at Brian Robinson Jr. because before we talk about replacing him, we need to understand what we're replacing. Robinson isn't just a bruiser pounding the rock. The way I like to describe him is he thrives in chaos. He breaks arm tackles, pushes through contact. He steps up in pass protection when you need him to. No, he's not elite, but he's absolutely above average, and that matters. So why keep him, right? A lot of people called for him to be replaced throughout the offseason, whether it was in free agency, whether it was in the draft, be traded, you know what I mean? Just have somebody brought in for competition, whatever it is, some way, shape, or form. A lot of people wanted him to be replaced. They didn't do it. How does that decision get better moving forward? Because that's where we are. Like, whether we agree with it or not, we are to the point where There is no other RB1 on this roster outside of Brian Robinson, right? So let's start with the offensive line. If Laramie Tunsil and Josh Connerly Jr. raise the floor or even the ceiling of the offensive line, that's already 2 spots upgraded. That also reshuffles guys like Brandon Coleman and Andrew Wiley into more competitive or rotational roles. In theory, the entire group improves. The trickle-down economics of it makes everybody better, which helps the run game and Brian Robinson Jr. But the biggest shift, I think, has come from Cliff Kingsbury. Robinson fits the mold of Kingsbury's preferred backs. Make no mistake about it. Go back to his time in Arizona alone to see that. 2019, Cliff Kingsbury's first year as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, Kenyon Drake and David Johnson lead the team in rushing. However, it was David Johnson, very similar build to Brian Robinson Jr., leading the team till he gets injured. Then they go make the trade for Kenyon Drake, who is a little bit smaller, same height, about 10 to 12 pounds lighter than Brian Robinson Jr. They make that trade midseason more out of necessity than anything. Kenyon Drake again leads the team in rushing in 2020, 239 carries in 15 games. Over half of those runs came inside the tackles, even though he's 12 pounds lighter than Brian Robinson. So again, that is the way Cliff Kingsbury wants to run the ball. 2021 and 2022, James Conner takes over, a bigger, more physical back, even bigger than Brian Robinson. But clearly, when Cliff Kingsbury, we talk about the type of running back he wants, that is the type of back he wants. That is the type of back he has with Brian Robinson Jr. Now, Kingsbury had 2 good seasons in Arizona. In both, his lead back had at least 202 carries. In the down years, they didn't. So it's not as simple as run more, but when the game script allows, Kingsbury has shown that he likes to lean on his clear number 1 back. Didn't do it as much in 2024. Some of that could have been injury related. We kind of already talked about that a little bit. You know what I mean? I don't know that for sure. But that's where the potential comes in here. If Robinson gets 200 carries, even at the average yards per carry wanted from his quote-unquote replacement, it's 860 yards. Would have been 70 more than he had in 2024, ranked him about 20th in the RB running game business. Still not elite, but certainly trending up from 25th overall, right? And here's the key. Brian Robinson needs touches. One Commanders coach, specifically, I just remember having this conversation. One Commanders coach told us last year, Brian Robinson Jr. is a rhythm runner. He's an inside fighter. To borrow from Dan Quinn's affinity for boxing and using boxing metaphors, inside fighters don't land knockout punches in the first round. They wear you down. Then they find the time to strike. Here's a stat for you. In his career, Brian Robinson Jr. has averaged less than 3 yards per carry in only 3 of the 26 games where he's received at least 11 carries. Only 3 of the 26 times B-Rob has gotten at least 11 carries has he averaged less than 3 yards per carry. And look, a 3 yard per carry average is not amazing. But again, it's good. It's solid. That's 12% of the time. Not a great percentage. Not a large percentage to say. When he gets fewer than 11 carries, he's under 3 yards per carry in 9 of those 15 games. That's 60% of the time. If Brian Robinson Jr. doesn't touch the ball 11 times, 60% of the time, he's under 3 yards per carry. That isn't preference. That's production. Even stars like Saquon Barkley need time. Now, he's elite, Saquon. So he can do things like he did in the NFC Championship game, take his first carry for 60 yards and a touchdown. But he's still human, and he still needs those inside blows. On Saquon Barkley's next 11 carries, after that first carry, the one for the touchdown, Saquon gained just 30 yards. His next 11 carries, 30 yards. That's it. His 12th carry, another big gainer. I think it was 22 yards, if I remember correctly. It's a rhythm game. The run game is a rhythm game. And if Robinson gets that rhythm, 11 carries per game every week, his 2024 yard per carry average when receiving at least 11 touches was 4.6 yards per carry. That projects out to 938 yards in 14 games. Over 17, if he can stay healthy, that's over 1,000 yards. 14th in the NFL. We're going from 25th to 14th. That's huge. That's a huge increase. Not elite still, but that's a player worth keeping, especially when he fits the system. So when we talk about why did the Washington Commanders keep Brian Robinson? Why didn't they go sign one of these free agents? Why didn't they go draft Travion Henderson or what have you? I think that is where the answer really comes in, because when Brian Robinson Jr. has the volume, has the opportunity to do the things that he needs to do, he's shown that he can be a serviceable running back. Everybody wants an elite running back. Everybody wants Saquon, Derrick Henry, even Jahmyr Gibbs, and we'll get into him just a little bit here in a little bit. Everybody wants that, prime Adrian Peterson running back. But the bottom line is usually 27, 28 teams don't have that guy. So what you need is to have a guy that you can win with, and a guy that you can use, and a guy that can help your team win. But you need to be able to use him appropriately. So the knowledge, the fact that, and I remember thinking this at the time, like when the coach said, Brian Robinson's a rhythm runner. He needs to get touches, get a feel for the game, set it up, get a feel for the defense, and then boom, he'll hit. I remember thinking at that moment, all right, then why isn't he getting more? You know what I mean? If we know this about the guy, why isn't he getting it? And then the next week we came out, and I don't remember exactly which game this was, but I do remember coming out of that week and saying again, all right, we know that our number one running back needs touches to get into a rhythm. We know that when he gets into a rhythm, that's when he's at his most dangerous and he's really good. And again, the Washington Commanders don't need me to sit here in my home office, do this research, tell them that when Brian Robinson Jr. rushes the ball more than 11 times, he's getting 4.6 yards per carry. When he rushes less than 11 times, he's getting about 3 yards per carry. They don't need me to tell them that. They already know that. So we know all this information. Why aren't we doing it? The Washington Commanders were not a team that were playing from behind all the time. Even if they were playing from behind, usually it's 1.5 scores, 7 to 10 points, right? You can still run the ball then. So I think it comes a lot down to the execution of the offense. With Eric Bieniemy, there was nobody to keep him in check from throwing the ball 50 times with a first-year starting quarterback. With Cliff Kingsbury, and he even said this to us himself, there were times where Dan Quinn had to say, hey, dude, we're going to run the ball a little bit here, because Cliff has kind of self-admitted, like he would just throw the ball downfield every single time if he had, his druthers. But Dan Quinn was there to kind of put him in check. Maybe Dan Quinn needs to put him in a little bit more check. Just get the ball to your running back a little bit more. Let him get into that rhythm. Of course, the defense, if you cannot give up early points, certainly would help Cliff Kingsbury feel more comfortable getting those things. And so again, there's a lot of things to go hand in hand. So I don't want to sound like this is all on Cliff by any means either. There's certainly responsibility or blame to go everywhere else. But again, the question comes in, if Robinson is staying, which it appears he is, if he's the guy, which it appears he is for at least 2025, how do you make him more than just a guy? How do you use him to elevate this offense, not just stabilize the offense? That's where we're going to go next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to wrap up this episode of Locked On Commanders by looking at the bigger picture. We're talking about Brian Robinson Jr. today. Is the replacement talk disrespectful? Is it warranted? I think as we went through the phases of the offseason, there was certainly justification to talk about, should he be replaced, or should somebody come in and at least compete to replace him, things like that. I think as we've gone through the phases of the offseason, however, and now, I think the time needs to kind of come to say, okay, how does this team, and look, as fans, you can talk about whatever you want, but as media members, I think now is the time to say, Brian Robinson Jr. is the RB1. How do we envision this team being successful with this situation? Because that's a situation that you have. So let's wrap this up by looking at the bigger picture. Brian Robinson Jr.'s potential 1,000-yard pace when given enough carries, and what that means for the Commanders' rush attack as a whole. Could it be better? Sure. But could it be a lot worse? Yeah. And understanding the balance is key to the whole trade debate. Kareem Hunt got 200 carries for the Kansas City Chiefs. More carries than Brian Robinson got. Came up with under 730 rushing yards. So it can be definitely worse. David Montgomery, who Lions fans love, who a lot of people consider is one of the better running backs in the NFL. I'm not going to say one of the best, because I don't think that's where he is, but one of the better running backs in the NFL. He came out with 2 fewer carries than Brian Robinson did last year and had 24 fewer rushing yards. So if David Montgomery got 2 more carries last season and each of them broke for 12 yards, he would have matched Brian Robinson Jr. And I know nobody in Detroit wants to trade David Montgomery or shift David Montgomery. So I think the answer kind of lies in there. You don't need to replace Brian Robinson as much as you need to accentuate him. You need to use him more or pair him better. The way that the Lions do that with David Montgomery is they use Jahmyr Gibbs as a complementary back to David Montgomery. Now, can Ja'Cory Crosky Merritt fill a similar role for the Commanders where he's a complementary back? Probably not in his first year. Maybe down the line it's possible. Now, while Crosky Merritt and Jahmyr Gibbs don't play the same style of football, they're not the same style of running back, Ja'Cory Crosky Merritt could still serve as a reliable backup who spells Robinson and keeps the running game fresh, is really kind of what we're looking at here. As far as getting a Jahmyr Gibbs type of back, that's going to be a future thing, or the Saints are going to sell Alvin Kamara. Like that's the only when you look at the landscape of the NFL, the only guy there could potentially become available to fill that role for the Washington Commanders in relation to Brian Robinson Jr. would be Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. And as of right now, they don't appear to be selling. Looking back at the 2025 NFL draft, I know a lot of us, and I say us because I was certainly in that group, we're really high on running back, possibly going to the Commanders in that selection, meaning every time the Commanders came on the clock, there was not a Gibbs type that you can say was in range. There were some good backs that were in range, but there was not a Gibbs type. There's not a complementary guy that's going to be better than Austin Eckler. So at number 29, the best two backs left on the board, Quinshon Judkins, Travion Henderson, both out of Ohio State. Both guys are more of a Brian Robinson than they are Jahmyr Gibbs. I like both. You might remember every day, especially Henderson was one of my favorites, one of my top guys. I mocked him in the first round. If you're looking to hold on to Robinson, adding another him in the first round kind of just convolutes things. A lot of our mocks involving taking Travion Henderson involved either a trade in that mock of Brian Robinson or conversations of, okay, maybe they trade him down the line, right? At number 61, second round, Caleb Johnson, Iowa, was the best running back on the board. Again, basically a Brian Robinson Jr. type. At number 128, Jordan James from Oregon could have been an option. He's certainly more of a Jahmyr Gibbs type than he is a Brian Robinson Jr. type. But do you want to get back Jalen Lane? I think most people are pretty happy with the Jalen Lane selection, wide receiver out of Virginia Tech. So when you look back at free agency, take that step back. You don't really see a player they missed out on that could have been that guy, at least better than Austin Eckler. And Eckler is an Anthony Lynn guy. Anthony Lynn, Washington Commanders offensive run game coordinator. So the whole thing goes hand in hand. Bottom line, Brian Robinson Jr. may not be elite, but if you use him like he is, you just might get elite results. So again, projections are tricky, right? We take data, we extrapolate it to what it could look like. We extrapolate it to 16, 17 games, what that could look like. And certainly those extrapolations, those estimations could be wrong. Most likely are going to be wrong. You're very rarely going to hit those on the nose. But they could be wrong short. They could also be wrong long. You could have more production out of Brian Robinson Jr. because if you give the rhythm back more carries, the average might go up more substantially, if that makes sense. So again, I think improving the run game starts with improving a little bit of the scheme usage, understanding who your player is, understand that he needs carries, he needs to warm up, right? You got to put him in the microwave for 11 seconds, which is 11 carries in this analogy, and let him get hot. Getting the offensive line better, which they seem to have done, at least on paper, certainly could help as well. And if you use them, you might just get the results that you're looking for. Coming up next on Locked On Commanders, it's mailbag time. If you want to submit a question or a topic, become a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. As training camps get closer and roster moves keep coming, they'll help you stay the most informed NFL fans around. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers, I appreciate you showing up today, just like you do every other day. Until we speak again, be safe, be kind. I'll see you right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.